ideas for transport in the Greater Cambridge region. I then went off to do a Master's in Transport Economics. I now work for North Hertfordshire District Council as a Transport Policy Officer.
Thank you, Edward. And also I've got with us David Cairns from Cambourne Parish Council, who I think is somewhere hunkered in the corner of the Houses of Parliament. David, I don't know if you're able to introduce yourself.
Yes, hi James, hi everybody. I've just made it outside, so if it looks like it's dark, it's because it is. I'm sitting outside House of Parliament. Nice to meet you all. So I'm here to represent Cambourne Parish Council, and in particular, I am the transport lead for Cambourne. Nice to see you all.
Thank you very much to the both of you. Let's try and get this slideshow to work. So the main points that we want you to take away from this evening's presentation are that we understand the need for better public transport and cycling, and that we support changes to achieve this. We're not against public transport or cycling improvements. There are significant financial, ecological and transport risks with the Greater Cambridge Partnership Scheme. I'll refer to them as GCP from here on. The County Council will be the responsible authority responsible for those risks. There is an alternative, an in-highway scheme that can deliver similar transport benefits without the significant financial and ecological risks. There's also significant public opposition to the Greater Cambridge Partnership Scheme, and we would like you to ask the GCP to carry out a full comparison between its scheme and the alternative scheme that we're going to show you tonight before making a decision. So I'm going to hand over to Edward, who's going to talk you through the GCP scheme and also the alternative.
Thanks, James. So really this is just for the benefit of any of you who haven't looked in detail at what the GCP Busway scheme is. So starting from Cambourne, the idea is that it would break out on the east side of Cambourne through a piece of land that's reserved for access to the Broadway. Now, there's no reason why this couldn't be done now, but it's being packaged in with the rest of the scheme. It will then go on a new road through the Bourne Airfield site, which, as you know, is allocated for development. So there'll be housing on this site. Slightly oddly, the busway is shown as going right to the north and edge of the Bourne Airfield site. So that the whole airfield site is due for development. You might wonder why the route isn't going to go through the middle of the site and therefore be more accessible to more people within the site. It then continues alongside the A428 on a segregated road. So a new road will be built between the A428 and St Neots Road. And then it will join St Neots Road just before the Scotland Farm roundabout. And to the north of the A428, so the other side of the dual carriageway, there will be the process to build a park and ride, so a new park and ride. And the buses will come in from Cambourne and then call in at the park and ride on their way into Cambridge. Well, there's nothing to stop some services starting from the park and ride. The original plan was to propose a continuation of a segregated route east from there, but actually that would have entailed the removal of the entire screen of trees that separates Hardwick Village from the A428, and quite, reasonably, the villagers protested against that, and the compromise is that actually the buses will continue on the existing road on St Neots Road through the village, right through to a point just short of what's called the Madingley Mulch roundabout, where it will then branch off onto a new road to the south, bypass the Madingley Mulch roundabout, and then continue, as you can see, more or less due east through the north of Cambourne, and that will go through the orchard on the north side of Cambourne, if you know it, and then continue to the M11 to, you may be aware that there is already a cycle footbridge over there. There will be a new bridge for buses that will go over and then land in the West Cambridge site. The buses will then travel through on the existing roads through the West Cambridge site, and then turn south to then join a new road that will partly follow the existing cycleway, and then the process, it would then dive around the athletics track and come out onto Grange Road, just north of the rugby club. So as you can see, so there are sections of this which are new road, and there are sections of it which are just running on the existing road. So if you thought the original proposal, I mean, the original proposal was to build a completely segregated route all the way. So if you weren't aware, that has changed quite significantly. A number of different alignments were looked at around Coton, but the decision is to go for the preferred route that they've chosen is the one that goes through the north of Coton and through the orchard. It should also be noted that alongside the new sections of busway, there will be an active travel route. Now, at the moment, GCP hasn't actually made a firm decision about whether the busway will be a road or whether it will be a guided busway in the same way as the existing Cambridge guided busway, so curb guided. That's not their preference. The preference is to have what's called an optically guided road, so that there will be some form of marking along the road that will guide buses through, so an optical sensor that will follow that. If it's just a normal road, then it actually doesn't need to have an access road in the way that the existing Cambridge guided busway does, but nevertheless that's designed in. But one of the odd features of this is if it is to be an active travel route, you'd want it to be going to the destination people want to go. And actually, arguably, the route that it follows is not the route that people would want to follow. It doesn't go as the most direct route to the villages, and it also chooses the steepest hill to climb back up the hill to join St Neots Road. And none of that seems to be particularly well thought through. And in any case, there is a greenway, cycleway being built that started now, that's being built out to Hardwick and could be extended through the Bourne Airfield, or Highfields Corner, and then Bourne Airfield into Cambourne. Okay, so that's kind of just a quick run through of what the proposal is at the moment. If we then move on to what the context of all of this is. So this proposal grew out of the current local plan, which put Bourne Airfield and an expansion of Cambourne into the local plan. So there was a large amount of development. There was a lot of concern that the existing road network wouldn't support the transport demand that would create, in particularly down Madingley Hill, which is very congested because that's the only way of getting onto the M11 from the A428. So the proposal then was to build a segregated busway, but actually the policy didn't say it had to be a segregated busway. It just said that it had to be a high quality public transport route. But since then, a lot has changed. So East West Rail wasn't even being thought of then. That is being actively backed by the government, being financed by the government. And at the moment, it is expected that will be built from Cambourne into Cambridge South Station and onto Cambridge Station, and then ultimately into a Cambridge East Station and out toward Bury St Edmunds and Ipswich. So there will be some really good connectivity from Cambourne, which wasn't conceived of at the time of the local plan. As I just mentioned, that we've got a cycleway being built through the villages, connecting up all of the villages. Cambourne is actually a cyclable distance from Cambridge, certainly to West Cambridge, and certainly with an e-bike. So that should be quite an attractive way for people to travel. The west of Cambourne, the A428 dualling is being continued all the way through to the M1. So that will be also an attractive sort of commuting route, as well as all the other types of trips that people want to make. Cambridge South Station has started, that is being built, and then obviously that becomes relevant once East West Rail comes on stream. There is an active review of the Girton interchange. So as I mentioned before, that the only way of getting between the A428 and the M11 is via Madingley Hill. We've long argued, as many local councillors also argued, that the Girton interchange should be turned into an all-ways junction, so you can move between the A428, the A14 and the M11 without joining a local road. And obviously the local councillors are currently in a stage of reviewing the local plan, and we haven't yet seen what new sites will be coming forward in that. So it's worth asking, so what is the problem that GCP is now trying to solve, given that so much has changed in the context? Why is GCP still pursuing the busway? And it's difficult really to understand why we need the whole solution that's being proposed, because now more than ever, the problem really is confined to the stretch between the Madingley Mulch roundabout down the hill to the M11. And that's partly because there's this, about 30% of the traffic on there is just moving between the M11 and the A428. It's not local traffic, it's what's called strategic traffic. It's through traffic going to other destinations. So that's where the problem is focused. That's where there is congestion. There is less congestion now than there was pre-COVID, but there is still congestion, and buses do get caught up in that traffic coming into Cambridge, or getting at least certainly as far as the M11. Now, I did some detailed analysis of journey times from Cambourne to Cambridge, looking at data in 2019, and that very, very clearly shows that the delay is on Madingley Hill. So the yellow is the journey from Cambourne all the way through Cambourne, and it goes quite a long way, winding around through Cambourne, along St Neots Road to Madingley Mulch roundabout. There is very little variation in journey time there, and actually the variation is more to do with passenger pickup than it is to do with congestion. Then the orange bit is the delay on Madingley Hill, and you can see that the delay builds until around 9 o'clock, and then it decays again. And then beyond the M11 to Northampton Street and Queen's Road, that's the blue section. Again, there's not a lot of variation in journey time along there. So, it's really, really clear the problem is on Madingley Hill. And if we look at the journey times outbound, there really is no variation at all. So there is no problem at any time of day, certainly not during the evening peak, with traffic outbound, unless there is an incident on the M11 or something like that. But in general, there is absolutely no need for any intervention to improve journey times outbound, because there is no problem there. Okay, so the conclusion there really is that the intervention that's needed, the problem that needs to be solved, is to improve that bus journey reliability between the Madingley Mulch roundabout and the M11. That's where the problem is, inbound in the morning, and that's the problem that needs to be solved. And we can see this as being soluble, and I'll go on to explain how we propose it could be solved. But we see this as being an interim solution before East West Rail comes on stream, which will provide a high speed, high reliability journey time to the biomedical campus, to the central of Cambridge, and if you change to get to Cambridge North, then also the Science Park and the whole North East Cambridge development site. So we would see a lot of journeys switching to rail when East West Rail comes along. If the Girton interchange were fixed and that took 30% of the traffic off Madingley Hill, then that too would have huge benefits for Cambridge and for the buses that are using that. So we think that what we need is an interim solution that solves that congestion coming down Madingley Hill into Cambridge in the mornings. So the proposal that we have come up with, so this is a piece of work that Cambridge Past, Present and Future commissioned. I did the research for it. We submitted it to the independent inspector. So when GCP commissioned a kind of a review of the scheme, they brought in an independent inspector to look at it. We submitted ours to that. The inspector looked at it, and his opinion was that it didn't change the underlying context or assumptions for GCP's scheme, but actually it had merit in its own right. And pending a review of the modelling around the impact of East West Rail, it should be considered as part of the mix. And as I mentioned before, the policy context for this is not specifically to build a busway, it is to build necessary measures to ensure that bus journey times are reliable between Bourne Airfield and Cambourne and Cambridge. And so, and actually, it gave officers the option of building a busway or something on the A1303. So there's nothing in policy that requires a segregated off-road busway. It just requires a reliable service. It requires measures that will create a reliable bus service. So the scheme that we'd like to share with you uses the existing road all the way from Cambourne to the Madingley March roundabout. And then there are interventions from the Madingley March roundabout down Madingley Hill that will give buses priority and therefore a more reliable journey time. And you can sort of see here just a comparison between the interventions we're proposing, which also actually include, if you've driven on the A428, you'll notice that there's a lane that goes under the tunnel, which is hatched out. So it goes down to a single lane before it joins the A14. That hatched out lane could become a bus lane, and then you could actually have a really high reliability bus service running along the A428 to the Science Park and in the north of Cambridge. And then, as I say, I'll show you the interventions we proposed on Madingley Hill to get into Cambridge, and then either to the M11 to go down to the biomedical campus, or to continue into West Cambridge and then central Cambridge. So starting from the western end, as we said before, there really is no congestion on St Neots Road. So you'd use St Neots Road, the buses would use St Neots Road till they get to the Madingley March roundabout. It would be perfectly possible, it's a large roundabout, perfectly possible to put a bus priority cut through with traffic lights, giving buses priority that allows them access to Madingley Hill, Madingley Road on the other side. And from there, there would be a bus lane added on. So on the north side of the road, where there's a field, the road would be widened to include a bus lane, and also potentially a second lane that would allow more traffic to be queued, because what we'd do is we'd put some traffic lights before the Madingley Wood, so that you could hold traffic back, but give the buses a clear run, and then when they get to the front, they get let into the traffic immediately at the front, and it would be free flowing immediately after the lights. So this technique is called queue relocation. So rather than allowing a queue to just form at the last possible point, you actually allow the queue to form where it's not causing any disturbance or interaction with other junctions on the traffic, and that allows you to get the buses past. So from Madingley Wood, you then have a section that goes past the American Cemetery. Now, there's two options here. If we have the traffic lights that regulate the flow, you could actually do without a bus lane along this section, but there is actually space to put a bus lane. So there are two options there, and it'd be a matter of modelling which was the preferred one and what the trade-offs were in terms of the impact on the setting of the American Cemetery. But it would be possible to do it without a bus lane. And then once you get past the cemetery, there's actually space again within the existing highway to add an extra lane to be a bus lane, and then that can run, again, the buses can bypass any queue that is forming along that section. Almost all of this can be done without within the just taking the verge, not even taking any trees, and certainly not going outside the land that's owned by the Highway Authority. So if we carry on into Cambridge, we get to the M11 bridge. You'll know that there's already a bus lane leading into that. It would be possible to reallocate the space on the bridge to continue the bus lane over the bridge, and then all the way to the Park and Ride. So you'd have priority access into there, and then into the the large junction just beyond the park and ride. And that would give buses almost a completely clear run from the Manning Notch roundabout to just beyond the park and ride. So on that basis, the journey time would be actually slightly faster than on GCPs, because we don't propose building a park and ride. We don't think that's is appropriate, so therefore buses don't need to make that detour to enter the park and ride, and also our route is more direct. So journey times are very, very similar, possibly slightly quicker with what we're proposing. On 5% of the days, on the 5% slowest days, so the sort of 1 in 20 journey times, it could be slightly longer, but on my measurement, 6.5 minutes. So not a hugely significant delay compared to the delays that are experienced now. But actually the biggest difference between the two schemes is in the cost. So GCP's scheme currently has a budget of 157 million. The officers already acknowledged that is not adequate given inflation that's running very high at the moment. The actual budget will have to be reset, but they can't do that until they've done another costing for it, and that won't be until the next business case is produced. But just estimating, just using ONS statistics on construction inflation, the actual cost is now likely to be over 220 million. And that compares to what we estimate would be required for the intervention we're proposing, which would be almost only be less than 20 million. So a tenth the cost for similar benefits. And also it could be delivered more quickly because there's less construction involved, and also it can be done in sections, whereas the busway has to be built and opened all as one, at least all the bits that are continuous sections. So, and the current opening date is 2026, but that could well slip again. So I think we've covered our scheme in enough detail, but if you have any questions, then I'd be very happy to answer them. If just on the next slide, we just got a quick summary of what the situation is. So back to you, James.
Brilliant, thanks, Edward. Yes, we can take questions about our scheme at the end of the Q&A. So there's obviously a reason that we've invited you here this evening. If we thought the GCP scheme was brilliant, we wouldn't be holding this meeting. So we are concerned about what's being proposed. So one of the problems is financial, as Edward mentioned, the huge cost of this. Just to give you an idea, that would be around 30% of the GCP's funding. And that means that actually the GCP wouldn't then be able to deliver many of the other schemes it's currently planning, which could potentially waste millions of pounds in consultants fees, and other planning which has developed projects which can't be delivered. And certainly it wouldn't be possible, we don't believe, to deliver the 3 busway schemes that are currently being proposed by the GCP. We mentioned East West Railway. Clearly that severely weakens the business case for the busway, simply because it would be faster journeys to the biomedical campus, Cambridge Station, and potentially on the Cambridge Science Park, and it can also carry more people. And as we mentioned, the government's recently made a commitment to that in the 2022 autumn statement. And we also know that the cost of maintaining the busway will fall to the county council. I've seen different figures for this, between 1.1 million and also 5 million, but I think 1.1 million is what they've got in the latest business case to maintain the facility once it's built. There is a significant ecological impact of the GCP scheme. So the map here, I know it's perhaps not easy for you to understand if you don't know the Coton area well, but the M11 is on the sort of right-hand side of the screen there, and over through the middle is Cambridge Road with the Orchard Garden Centre. And the orchard basically occupies the fields to the northeast of Coton Village. So that's this area in here. If you can see my mouse, and you can see from this map, which is from the GCP themselves, would show that it's not just the route itself which would be required for the orchard, but also the land around it will be required. So this whole area will be more or less destroyed by the busway. And there's a picture there on the left of what this looks like. So it's a traditional orchard, and the habitat for traditional orchards is really important. They have old trees, and old trees have lots of holes and bark and things on them which create lots of microclimates and microhabitats and support a lot of species, but also the land underneath the trees is uncultivated, so it's also important habitat as well. We've lost 90% of our traditional orchards in the UK since the 1950s, and because of the importance of the habitat for nature and its increasing rarity, it's now listed as a UK Biodiversity Action Plan priority habitat. And the Coton Orchard is one of the largest remaining traditional orchards in the county, and it's also part of our cultural heritage. Cambridge used to be surrounded by orchards, and this is one of the last surviving orchards. It's over 100 years old. So I think you can see that the impact of the busway on the orchard would be to pretty much destroy it. And not only that, one of the reasons that orchards have declined so considerably is because they have limited economic value. And the economic value of these orchards now lies in using them for events and activities and guided walks rather than necessarily the picking of the apples. And clearly, if you put a new road smack bang through the middle of the orchard, it completely destroys any possibility of generating any future economic purpose for the orchard, and almost certainly spells the demise of the entire orchard. Then a GCP will say that they're able to mitigate this impact. Now, clearly, that's not possible. It takes at least 50 years for this traditional type of orchard to grow to an age where it becomes valuable as habitat, often 60, 70, or even longer. So, and pretty much all of us on this call this evening will be dead long before any replacement habitat could grow to a sufficient quality to replace it. And of course, we can't replace lost heritage either. So we know that the GCP has carried out some ecological surveys in the orchard because the orchard owner's given them permission, but they haven't yet shared that information with us. So I'm hoping that this video here is going to work, and I can just show you a fly through. It might just take a second or two to load up if I'm lucky. If not, we'll share it with you afterwards, but it gives you, here we go. So this is a drone fly through of the route that the busway would take. So it would go through those trees that we're going over now. They would have to come down, and it would destroy all of this vegetation that you can see in front of you. And just beyond the orchard are the fields that belong to Cambridge past, present, future as it goes up and over the hill. So as well as the Coton Orchard, the busway would also go through two Cambridge City wildlife sites. One of them is a strip of scrub, which is also UK priority habitat. As well as destroying that scrub, it would split that wildlife corridor in two. So again, whilst you might be able to recreate some scrub, you can't undo the habitat fragmentation that would cause. The other wildlife site is a hedgerow next to the West Fields, which contains some unusual species. So this slide here shows the archaeological trial pits for the busway. It's taken recently to give you an idea as to sort of where it would go and the scale of the infrastructure as it goes west of Coton. So Cambridge past, present and future purchased land around Coton in the 1930s in order to prevent development destroying Madingley Hill, destroying the setting of two historic villages of Coton and Madingley, and also the setting of the historic city of Cambridge itself. The National Trust holds legal covenants over the fields and also Cote and Orchard, and that's in recognition of the need to protect this area. The American Cemetery, which is located on the top of Madingley Hill, was located there because it is such a beautiful location, and also on the understanding that it would be protected from the encroachment of development. It's also worth noting that this land is also in the green belt. So in terms of some of the transport problems with the GCP's scheme, I think it's worth just flagging some of those up to you. So I think, as Edward sort of touched on earlier, it's not the same as the St Ives guided busway. There are sections of this which are going to run on road with the traffic, and as Edward's identified, actually most of the journeys will only be a few minutes quicker compared to the alternative that we're proposing. And really the off-road section only bypasses one junction, which is Madingley roundabout, whereas if you mean the St Ives guided busway passes lots of other junctions, you couldn't do that same journey without that busway being in place. The GCP busway won't serve the Cambridge Science Park. That's provided by a bus service which runs on the A428, and it won't serve the biomedical campus. And in that sense, it's no better than the alternative that we've proposed. So the GCP scheme would have to go into the West Cambridge site. It would then have to come out of the West Cambridge site onto the road and then back round to get onto the M11, which would obviously be slower than the route we're proposing, which would go straight down Madingley Hill and turn onto the M11. Quite significantly though, the GCP scheme arrives, and it really takes buses just to the edge of the city at Grange Road, and at that point it enters city traffic, the same as the alternative route that we're proposing. And that's a particular problem with the return journey, because it's not possible for buses to get back to the start of the busway because of the one-way system. So they would have to either go via Northampton Street and Madingley Road or via Fen Causeway, and both of those involve bus going in the wrong direction to such an extent that it would be no quicker than our alternative and possibly slower. And it would definitely be slower during off-peak times when there's no congestion. And then finally, I think it's worth just thinking about the congestion charge. We don't know if that will go ahead, but if there were a charge, then it would increase, assuming that it works and that congestion is reduced, and it would increase the speed and reliability of buses when they reach the city centre, so when the buses arrive from the busway to Grange Road. But that would also apply to our alternative route. And of course, there'd be no need for the busway because congestion along Madingley Hill and Madingley Road would be reduced. So just touching on the active travel, the cycle route that the GCP is proposing to accompany their scheme goes up to the highest hill in the area, which would actually be a 40-metre height gain. So really only the fittest people are going to be able to use this, which raises questions about whether that actually discriminates against those who are not very fit, healthy or able. And it also creates a safety problem. You'd be looking at cyclists going downhill down there at around 30 miles an hour on a shared path, shared with pedestrians, dogs and children. So you can see there's clearly a safety problem with that scheme. It also runs adjacent to the main road in Hardwick and Bourne airfield, so not very safe or attractive to use. And it doesn't serve the village of Highfields Caldicot or much of Bourne airfield. And actually a Transport and Works Act order can't be used to build a cycle route, which is one of the reasons why the GCP are calling it a maintenance road. And the alternative route that we're proposing uses an existing byway. So the GCP is already committed to building a greenway or a cycle route out to the village of Hardwick. And actually there's a bridleway which extends from Hardwick to Highfields Caldicot, very close to Bourne airfield, and with a short additional piece of new infrastructure to connect to Bourne airfield. And this will be much less hilly, it's more direct, it's away from roads, so it's safer and more attractive. And actually Cambridge County Council has already identified that as a project that it would like to deliver, because most of it is already on bridleway. So just to summarise why we support an in-highway scheme, it's got similar journey times, it's better for ecology and landscape, it's got significantly lower carbon emissions, it's got a better cycle route, it would free up the GCP budget to deliver more of its programme, there's no risk to the county council to maintain the infrastructure, and the business case wouldn't be undermined by East West Rail coming along. So just a little bit about the consultation on the scheme. So the Greater Cambridge Partnership carried out several public consultations. All of them showed support for the in-highway scheme and significant opposition to the GCP scheme. and that was ignored by the Greater Cambridge Partnership. A local liaison forum made up of representatives from the parish council, local councillors and other stakeholders met between 2018 and 2021. There was very strong support from that forum for an in-highway scheme and significant opposition to the GCP route. Again, that was ignored, and actually the local liaison forum was then disbanded. A GCP consultation workshop took place in 2018, and that also resulted in support for an in-highway scheme and opposition to the GCP route, and that was also ignored. So as a result, the community felt very frustrated and that it wasn't being listened to. And therefore, 2 public demonstrations took place in Cambridge, attended by hundreds of people, including actually Councillor Bridget Smith, who is now the leader of the South Cambridgeshire District Council and a member of the GCP board. That's her, they're holding the Keep the Busway on the Road sign in the air. And there's also opposition from organisations, including the National Trust, the Wildlife Trust, the American Cemetery, People's Trust for Endangered Species, Coton Parish Council, Cambridge Past, Present and Future, CPRE, Coton Orchard, Hardwick Village, Save the Westfields and Coton Busway Action Group. So in conclusion, we understand the need for better public transport and cycling, and we support change to achieve that. The GCP scheme is not a requirement for the local plan. Other schemes can also satisfy the local plan. The GCP scheme is only partially off-road. It's not the same as a St Ives guided busway. There are significant financial, ecological and transport risks with the GCP scheme. There's an in-highway scheme that could deliver similar transport benefits without the significant financial and ecological risks. The County Council will be the responsible authority responsible for those risks. There is significant public opposition to the GCP scheme and support for an in-highway scheme. If this goes to public inquiry, we will demonstrate that the GCP has failed to properly consider an in-highway alternative between Hardwick and Cambridge. So before more time and money is wasted, we're asking the County Council to request that the GCP carries out a full comparison of the 2 options before any decision is made. So thank you. That's our presentation. We're happy to take any questions that you might have.
James, should I add a couple of words from the village?
Yeah, sorry, David. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just to say that. So, councillors, thank you again very much for coming. We do appreciate your time tonight, and we do appreciate your time, for some of you, over the last 9 years of the life of this project. The GCP has done some fantastic work around Cambridge. You've heard the stories of the greenways and the cycle routes, and that's really sort of game changing for many. And in developing some of the busways, out to Cambourne, for example, we've noticed they have listened to some of the consultations. So the plans originally around Hardwick have changed in response to what people of Hardwick said, and they've put forward a better scheme. I think as James said, our request to you is when you get to your meeting on the 21st of March, it's the last chance for the process to stop before it goes to Department for Transport, and then a public inquiry, which is long, expensive, and lawyer filled. And we think it's worth one more turn of the wheel with GCP and us locally to get a route that delivers the buses that are needed by the people in Cambourne and Bourne to come, but doesn't sacrifice the countryside around Coton that has been protected for 100 years, as you've heard. There are only 3 hills in Cambridge, and one of them is Madingley Hill. And once it's destroyed, it's destroyed. So we hope for your support. Many of you are not local to this area, so you might think, what's in it for you? But really, we hope that with you, and then eventually with GCP, we can get the best possible scheme that we can, which delivers both benefits, but also protects the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I've seen a couple of hands go up, so I'm going to take yellow hands on the screen. If you're not able to put your yellow hand up, then please put your physical hand up, and if I can't spot you, I'm hoping Sarah can. So Peter, I think you had your hand up first. Would you like to go?
No, it's just thanks. It was very interesting. Thanks for that. My main question is around East West Rail, because I totally follow the logic of what you're saying, which is to, inverted commas, wait for East West Rail because it will, answer a lot of these issues. 2 questions related to East West Rail. Which route alignment do you prefer or do you propose? Number 1. And secondly, what do you estimate are the impacts to villagers and residents from those two route alignments? Thanks.
Peter, hi. I'm not sure that we're sufficiently organised to be able to give you our opinion on East West Rail. I mean, I think certainly from Cambridge past, present and future's point of view, we prefer to see East West Rail come into Cambridge from the north, calling it Cambourne and serving some of the newer communities to the north of Cambridge and coming in that way rather from the south. But I think that East West Rail seem to prefer the route that's coming in from the south. And of the two routes that they were considering, I think either side of Cambourne, I think we would definitely prefer the route to the north. The route to the south sort of cuts through some significant countryside and also the historic villages of Caxton and Bourne and Bourne Windmill, really. So I think if we would want to see it come to the north of Cambourne in the first instance, and obviously if it does that and there's a stop there, then there's a potential obviously for park and ride there.
Okay, if I can ask very quickly one supplementary, because I know Steve and others want to come in, which is obviously as councillors, when we're looking at the environmental and land impact from the current GCP scheme, one of the things all of us will weigh up is what's the land and environment impact from that northern route of East West Rail, which you're supportive of, so that not tonight, but maybe in the lead up to any county council discussion, you can help us with that a bit more, or maybe some of the other councillors have a clear view, because I don't have a clear view of of the relative balance, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, Peter, that's a fair point. And I think that some of us are concerned that we might end up with both schemes, which, if you can imagine the impact of that on the countryside and the communities to the west of Cambridge, would be pretty horrific. Steve.
Yeah, hi, good evening and great presentations. I've got about 4 questions, so I'm going to be really quick with them and hope for a quick answer. So first of all, the bus is not going into Scott Farm. You don't agree with the park and ride. I would imagine that the GCP proposal is built on capturing people on that road, using the park and ride, getting out of the cars to get into Cambridge, but you're not planning to do that. So does your scheme literally omit, or is there another way that those drivers, not from Cambourne, but they're on the A428, are going to get picked up?
I'll answer that one.
Yeah.
So part of our proposal is to have a proper bus station in Cambourne. At the moment, there just is no good facilities. I mean, there isn't even a bus shelter at the main stop in the middle of Cambourne. So I think if there were good waiting facilities and there was a high frequency bus service from Cambourne and Bourne Airfield, then that would be attractive to everybody. Whereas if you put a park and ride in, then that's obviously attractive to the people who can drive to the park and ride, but it means you have a lower frequency service from Cambourne, so everyone else sort of suffers a less good service as a result. But I should say that our scheme doesn't actually prevent GCP building a park and ride. So if the business case is there for building a park and ride at Scotland Farm, they could still do that, and buses could call there if they wanted. So it doesn't. Our scheme doesn't prevent that. It's just that we actually would rather they invested in Cambourne itself and Bourne Airfield, so that there was good bus waiting facilities there and a high frequency service.
Okay, thanks. On the journey times you put up, Cambourne to Cambridge, was it the same endpoint you were using Cambridge City Centre for both, or?
Yes, so it was assuming that the only difference is where the two routes diverge. So yes, we've just taken the difference in the journey time. I think actually it's comparison of journey times to Grange Road, because that's the only bit that GCP hadn't actually committed to a route between Grange Road and Drummer Street. And that's partly because of the point that James made, is that although you can get eastbound through Silver Street, you can't get westbound out through Silver Street. So you therefore have to choose either the Pen Causeway, which gets very congested in the peak, or you have to go up to Northampton Street to the north, which is a much longer way around.
Okay, thank you. You had the journey time for the other vehicles, and it said saving. So it said time saving, then it had 0 for the C2C. The busway, and then it had 2 minutes for the general traffic. Now, because it was in the column saving, it seemed to indicate that'd be 2 minutes saved, but surely is it 2 minutes actually extra?
No, it is actually 2 minutes saved, and that's because of this business about queue relocation actually makes the traffic flow better. So you have free flowing traffic from the end of the queue at that bit before Madingley Wood, and so actually you get a shorter journey time. So that's
incredibly useful. So thank you for that one. Yeah. Modelling. This is all based on what the traffic's like at the moment. The GCP will be modelling for the future. Is there any modelling for the future with what you've shown us today, or is this all based on where we are now?
So it's based on 2009. So it's pre-COVID, when traffic levels are reportedly not quite at pre-COVID, but more importantly, although total traffic is slightly below pre-COVID, it is spread more through the day. So there is less peak time, and particularly in the morning peak. So I don't think even GCP actually has necessarily reliable data for what traffic is going to look like in the future, because nobody really knows. So their strategic model, the CSRM, Cambridgeshire sub-region model, which they use, will have all sorts of assumptions made about the future. But the main one that's impossible to really tell, other than whether how much working from home will persist as a working pattern, but also the mode choices people will make. So things like the advent of e-bikes will make commuting the kind of distance we're talking about, certainly from Hardwick or Hardfields, Caldercott, or even from Cambourne to West Cambridge. Those would all be quite attractive if there was a really good cycleway that was people felt safe, comfortable using. So there's a lot of unknowns, unfortunately, in terms of modelling the future. Which is why, in a sense, we prefer a more pragmatic solution that has a degree of future-proofness, but then something like East West Rail can really pick up the sort of heavy lifting of moving people to biomedical campus.
Last question.
Go on, Steve. Yeah.
So on the particularly, if I'm looking to the future, and this is described as an interim solution, you're relying on East West Rail and you're relying on Girton interchange. With East West Rail, there won't be the same. People won't automatically swap onto that, because a lot of concessionary fares are on the buses. Buses are cheaper, trains are expensive. So whilst you get some benefits, I wouldn't see it all transferring overnight. So when you're asking us, when this comes to council, to compare the two schemes, it seems to me we need to be a bit more nuanced. We need to compare the two schemes as they are now. The two schemes, if Girton interchange goes ahead, if the two schemes, the East West Rail goes ahead, and if the two schemes with both going ahead, because without those sort of guesstimates whether those things will arrive in the future and when they'll arrive, we'd have to know what the impact, what risk the county council will be taking if they don't go ahead. Does that make sense?
It does. So, I mean, what we proposed will provide very similar benefits to what GCP are proposing on traffic levels in 2019. If traffic levels, or at least the demand to travel, grows very significantly, as it will once the whole of Bourne Airfield is built out and the whole of Cambourne is built out, and also St Neots expansion as well, all of that will increase the demand to travel into Cambridge, assuming that employment growth continues in Cambridge. But how people choose what mode to travel will depend on a whole load of things, including, as you just said, price, the relative price of bus and rail. So I wouldn't say that our scheme depends on East West Rail or the Girton interchange. It's just that if those came along, they would make a step change difference. GCP's scheme actually doesn't make a step change difference, in part because it isn't entirely segregated end to end, and also because it doesn't get people from the edge of Cambridge to all the destinations in Cambridge. You've still got to get either down the M11 or through the centre of Cambridge to get to the biomedical campus, to get to the Marshall site once that gets redeveloped, to go to the science park and so on. So there's a lot of GCP solution basically just doesn't solve most of the problems of growth. It only solves a very small part of it. And so we would rather spend much less money on providing a good solution that isn't necessarily the perfect solution, but GCPs isn't the perfect solution, but free up money to make more interventions elsewhere to improve things for other parts of the county, for getting into the city.
Thanks, thanks, Edward. Just to add to that, the GCP scheme really is very good at getting people from Cambourne to the West Cambridge site, and that's about it. Which is just one of the growth areas, not of the others. Steve, thanks for those questions. They were good questions. Jacob, I think you were next.
Thank you so much. I hope that you can hear me okay. If you just confirm that. Perfect. So Steve has raised a lot of the questions that I had in mind, but I will continue from some of the questions that he's already raised. I am one of the councillors from Hardwick, in fact, and I just wanted to confirm if any of the calculations that you might have made, you've indicated that a park and ride in Dry Drayton is still potentially permitted. What would be the travel time if that traffic stop was added under your proposal? Because I think that that's potentially it's difficult for me to imagine a future where that central point for collection will actually not be going ahead.
So the difference is about 1.5 minutes. So basically most of that is the round trip to the park and ride. That'll probably be a little more than that. So our scheme would probably end up being in the order of a minute or so slower. But a lot depends on how you organise the bus services. So already some bus services, or certainly pre-COVID, increasing number of bus services were starting at Long Stanton on the St Ives Busway because they were filling up at St Ives. So I think a similar pattern would emerge, that some buses would start at Cambourne, some buses might even start at Bourne Airfield, and some buses would start at the Park and Ride, and each would then join the same route on into Cambridge. So I'm not sure that the comparison with journey times needs to be made sort of assuming that all buses will call it the Park and Ride. I think both GCP scheme and ours could sort of choose that some buses do and some buses don't. But you make a valid point that the Park and Ride probably will go ahead, but nevertheless, our argument is that actually rather than spend money on that, and there's a lot of money just to build the Park and Ride, you're better to invest that in improved access to the bus services and a higher frequency from Cambourne.
Yeah, I think that's certainly, I would agree with that. I think that nonetheless that central location, I think, is likely to be required with the potential predictions that the GCP is putting in, is throwing out to the public, let's say. The other questions were more regarding the actual traffic that you were showing at the very beginning of the presentation, and indicating that there is a problem with drivers trying to get onto the M11. Do we know which direction are they? As in, what is the most frequent route on their way? Are they going into that biomedical park in Trumpington, or which way is the general direction of the traffic from that interchange? And that I'm trying to understand, because you have brought up that the East-West Rail will likely reduce the use of the GCP scheme as is being proposed, and I'm just trying to understand whether that's whether the direction of the general traffic is actually matching with what you're saying, and I just wasn't quite sure whether that was the case.
So the Madingley Road junction with the M11 is southbound only. So
yes,
because it's very close to the Golden Change, you can't turn north. So all of that traffic is going south. How far south it's going, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I've seen good data that shows that certainly some of it comes off of the Trumpington, or some of it comes off of the Barton interchange. Some of it comes off, more probably comes off of the Trumpington interchange, but then some carries on south to to Stansted, to Bishop Stortford and so on. So I mean, there are multiple destinations, and I'm not sure that there is actually a really good analysis of origin destination data to answer that question fully.
Okay. Okay, I think that is that potentially something that you may be proposing as it's looking into your scheme.
Well, I'm not sure it applies specifically to our scheme. I mean, you know, I think GCP ought to have that data, and I've not seen it published.
Just
So
coming from there, also quite a bit of the traffic on both directions on that Madingley Road are trucks, and of course they are not heading for Cambridge; they are going further afield.
Yeah, I think Edward said that in his presentation, that obviously that's a lot of that traffic could just be A428 traffic going southbound to any direction, basically. And interestingly, I think Cambourne Parish did a survey or did a review of travel habits from Cambourne, and interesting what they found is actually people from Cambourne go in all directions. They go north, south, east, west. They don't all, as much as the GCP, go west into Cambridge. Although that's a majority route, it's only it's not a huge percentage. Neil, I think you were next.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. About passenger transport, given that we want to obviously attract more people into passenger transport, it seems that the more off-road, the better, you know, for the accompanying active route as well. But, you know, the noise of the road, the trucks, ride quality, all that sort of stuff. One of the things about these kinds of infrastructure is their ability to be scaled. Again, this is about the future. And when traffic is ramped up again, or just the need for passenger transport, more vehicles on the same route. And that brings me to the possibility of light rail as well. And so I think we need to keep these kinds of options open going into the future, and whether that is the same on the on-road route. Of course, I'd love for the GCP guys to be here, because I've heard a lot about these. There's some destruction in all of these routes. I was intrigued by the idea that it would cost less for maintenance if it was on road. I would question that. Roads cost an enormous amount to maintain, and if you put more pressure on them, make them bigger, it doesn't make them cheaper to maintain. I think mostly what I'm thinking about is the future, and at the moment, this one of the weaknesses that you've shown is it gets to Grange Road and that's it. But if you think into the future about the possible, especially light rail or something else, there will be other developments across town, I would say.
Well, of course, Neil, anything's possible in the future, but the planning system currently works on current proposals. And the GCP can't spend its money on things that might possibly happen in the future, and planning inspectors can't give approval for things that might happen in the future. And the scheme is not based on what's going to happen in the future. It's based on solving the local plan currently.
Well, it is. They do look into the future, and they have to dovetail with future developments and future growth. We're looking at just solving the problems that we have today will not do the job.
I think I agree with you, absolutely. But what GCP hasn't done is proposed a kind of a long-term solution that is of the kind you've described. I mean, were they to have reserved continuous route from Cambourne all the way to central, destinations in central Cambridge or even right through Cambridge, as CAM was, the Cambridge Autonomous Metro. I mean, that was part of that vision, was to have a continuous joined up route that actually got you to all the destinations in and around Cambridge. GCP aren't proposing that. They are, their busway ends at Grange Road, and at a point which you can't really imagine being used for light rail. I mean, it comes out at a pinch point on Grange Road with no obvious direct route in from there. So I think in terms of future proofing, I don't think GCP scheme does. You're right that a segregated road has more capacity because you can run a high frequency service up to a bus every 90 seconds or so. But, you know, so it's only if you move to off bus ticketing. But actually, you can run a much higher frequency bus service on the existing road. I mean, St Neots Road is not congested. You could run a very high frequency bus service along there, and our proposal simply gives the priority where there is congestion. So you're getting a lot of the benefits and a lot of the scalability without spending anywhere near as much money. But you know, we do need a long-term plan for the city. But I just don't think the GCP's busway does that, because it actually only provides it like ours is strategic interventions which don't actually connect up, and they don't actually lay the way for, say, light rail.
Yeah, and obviously, if there was heavy rail near in terms of East West Rail, then obviously that would provide that long-term future-proofing from the west. Alan, I think you're next.
Thank you, James, Edward, for the presentation. I've got a couple of questions, and I lived in St Neots for 30 years before I moved east of Cambridge, and so I've been stuck in that jam going down Maddenley Hill, just wanting to get on the M11, so I know what it was like. Just a couple of thoughts. I know, Edward, you were saying about not necessarily your buses would come from Cambourne, wouldn't pick up at the park and ride, or this proposed park and ride, for want of a better word. But would that mean that there are going to be lots of traffic coming from St Neots along the new A428 once that's dual carriageway, which will speed up that traffic coming in? But against that, if more people use the park and ride, before the Maddenley Mulch roundabout, that would mean presumably less traffic going down at the 01303 just to get onto the Maddenley Road park and ride site. So there's a negative and a plus point. I mean, I know you said you modelled it on pre-2019 routes, and I don't know how you model something in the, well, you can obviously model it in the future, but you're the expert, not me. But I just wonder how that would affect, you've got a plus of the A428, so you're going to get traffic coming along there quicker. But against that, if you can get more people onto the park and ride near Cambourne, it would stop a lot of the cars coming down the A1303.
Yeah, and as a strategy, that was developed in the 1990s, I think that is exactly what it's park and ride is meant to do, and it does do. The problem is it's not scalable. You just end up having to build more and more and more car parking, and it only ever serves the people who actually have access to a car. So you provide a really good bus service from the park and ride for people who can drive there, but for the people who can't drive or don't want to drive, they end up with a lower frequency bus service. So actually the solution is to have express bus services from St Neots running at a high frequency. And actually the X5 used to provide a pretty good service. And it could be, with additional demand, it could be running at a 15-minute frequency or even a 10-minute frequency. And really, you don't, if the bus fills up at the start, then actually it can run express without needing to stop anywhere else to pick up. So you can have a really fast journey time, certainly comparable with driving, using the A428 and then using the bus priority down Maddenley Hill. So that, to my mind, would be the better strategy. But I don't think that may not be what we get, and therefore the Scotland Farm park and ride will be there to intercept that traffic that's coming from further afield that maybe isn't served by Cambourne.
Just come back in very quickly on that. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've used going back a long time now. The X5 was a very good service, but I know that area long before Cambourne was even one brick had even been built. So it's obviously going way back. But yeah, thanks, Edward.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Alan. I can't see any other hands, so I'll take it from that.
James, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Sarah here. There are a couple of questions or comments in the chat function. Okay, I don't know whether you've seen that, but Philippa asks about the width of the area occupied by the busway. I think that came up when we were looking at it going through the orchard. Don't know whether Edward's got any information on that. Or Anna's got her hand up.
Yeah, I mean, there are two figures that we need to pull out. One is the width of the built structure. So that would be the 2-lane road, which would be 7.6 meters plus curbs plus a separation strip, which would be, I think, 1 meter or 1.5 meters, and then the cycle busway access, maintenance track thing, which I think it's proposed that that's 5 meters. I don't know if James, you can remember off the top of your head what width that's proposed for that.
I think the width of the path itself is 3 meters.
Anna's waving. So
Yeah, go on, Anna. Do you want to answer this one?
Yeah, I'm actually, my family owns Coton Orchard, so I obviously have an interest in this. We received some plans from WSP, and at the widest point it's 40 meters, and at the narrowest point it's 20 meters. So, and it goes right through the center of the orchard, because there's already a footbridge on 250 meters on one side, and you've got the junction 13 on the other. So in order to build yet another bridge over the M11, that's why it has to go through the center of the orchard. And then it's quite a substantial width of the sort of staging area before it goes over the M11. And if I could just add a couple of